What's up, guys? Welcome to the Creative Christian Podcast. I am super excited for today's episode because we're going to be doing something a little bit different than we usually do. Over the course of my time in the creative field, I've had a ton of conversations with different creatives across the spectrum, both on air with this show as well as in my personal circle. And a topic that comes up more often than not in these conversations is the topic of mental health. So whether we're talking about burnout, depression, anxiety, you name it, the mind is a battlefield where the enemy loves to just stir up trouble to keep creatives from walking out the unique calling that God's put on their life. And that's why I'm so excited for today's guest. She holds a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Liberty University. She's received training from the Association of Certified Biblical Counseling, and she operates her own practice called Holy Healing Counseling, where she believes that Christianity and psychology work better together than they do apart. So I am so excited to dive into some topics that I genuinely believe are going to breathe life into the topic of mental health for creatives today. And so I just want to give a warm welcome to today's guest, Kara Veldman. Kara, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. That was such a nice welcome and intro.
I like to do a little bit of research so I can kind of get a gauge of
first.
I appreciate that. Well, you did a great job on your website, so
Thank you.
well done making it very easy to access all that info.
Thank you.
So that I didn't have to do too much internet stalking because that can be a little weird sometimes. But
I love that. mental health intersect. And like it intersected because for me, like there was no other option. Like I needed Jesus, but I also needed my therapist to tell me, hey,
Yeah.
like what you went through as a child, like this is why your brain is crashing right now. Like there's also a
Mhm.
scientific reason, you know?
Yeah.
And that honestly saved my life. Like it that connection, like that saved my life. So that is kind of
Wow.
briefly why I'm so passionate about it.
That's super powerful. And
Yeah.
I love how you even mentioned, like, you kinda had that tangent of, like, you don't trust a therapist that hasn't been to therapy, but it's like, I think that that is, like, really in the same way that I think for creatives that work with clients, right? It's like if creatives aren't
Mhm.
understanding their clients' needs
For sure.
and be putting themselves in their seat, then creatives aren't really gonna get to the solution that the clients are looking
Yeah.
for. I think that probably is in the same way with
Yeah.
therapy
Well,
and probably even more so.
yeah, I feel like it would be like a songwriting coach coaching you who's never written a song.
Right.
It's like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's like, how are you qualified,
Yeah.
outside of and there's so much that you can hear and learn about something in school, but there's such a difference between learning about it and
Oh yeah.
living it, and when you put the 2 together,
Oh
that's where
yeah.
you really see, you
1000%.
see people thrive. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's super powerful, and I love too that, it seems like at least what I'm
Mhm.
experiencing more and more, and I'm not sure how it is on your side as somebody working in the field, but it
Yeah.
seems like the stigma between, like, being a Christian and needing therapy, I think before used to for a few years ago even, it used to be pretty
Mhm.
contentious, but it seems like that's kinda starting to break down. I feel like that probably, I saw a lot of that breakdown during the pandemic. I think people just
Mhm.
realized that mental health
Yeah,
was so important,
for sure.
but yeah, I mean, how have you seen that even just, like, with that stigma between, like, just pray it away versus, like, no, like, Jesus made our brains and
Yeah,
we need to treat them like we
exactly.
treat any sort of physical wound, you know?
Well, honestly, like just kind of what you said, like I never understood why everybody agrees that God created our physical bodies, but then it's like
Mhm.
when it comes to like, oh yeah, he also created our thoughts and our emotions and our minds. Like our emotions aren't bad,
Yeah.
like he created them too. So why are we like taking that away, Um,
Mhm.
and I specialize in kids, teenagers, young adults. And so, I mean, in this day and age, like in our society, I mean, kids are just being like bulldozed. I mean, it is
Right.
so bad. Like, and I won't go into details, but it's so bad. Um,
Mhm.
and it is really tough for me. I've also been a youth leader my whole like adult life too.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult because I feel like, yes, there's been major strides in the churches of accepting therapy, but more so in the sense of like biblical counseling and pastoral counseling, which is
Mhm.
amazing. And I have kind of a foot in both fields. I do the licensed
Yeah.
mental health counseling, under the state board. And then I also do biblical counseling, which is not under the state. So you can kind of be more free with your speech. Um,
Yeah.
but so like in churches a lot, it's like, biblical counseling, pastoral counseling really supported. The only kind of downside that I think we can maybe both agree on is it's more for like adults, couples, marriages, kind of things like that.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's when the teenagers and the adolescents and the middle schoolers kind of fall through.
Mhm.
And that's really tough. And that's where my biggest heart is. And I kind of saw
Right.
that like culminated, like as a youth leader when I would be, co-leading small groups with my co-leaders and, like middle school, high school, they're all, what they're experiencing nowadays is unlike even when I was in high school 10 years ago, like just completely different. But, they would be like, I got a knife and I started cutting, or my best friend has an eating
Wow.
disorder, or, like I almost took a whole bottle of pills because I'm just so depressed. And my co-leader,
Mhm.
um, they would just be like, thank you so much for telling us that. Like, we're going to be praying with you. And one, I don't expect them to
Yeah.
say anything different because they're not trained and they don't know. So it's like, it's not their
Mhm.
fault. And then two, yes, of course, we're going to stand around them and we're going to pray for them. But there's gotta be a third of like, thank you for
Right.
telling us that. Now we need, theoretically, the answer is we need to now partner you with a teenage, a therapist who specializes
Hmm.
in teenagers that's part of our church so that you don't fall through the cracks. And that's what's not
Right.
happening.
That is such a great point. It kind of
Yeah.
it almost makes me think of like I think because I serve in youth ministry as well,
Hmm.
just volunteering, and I know that even youth pastors probably experience this on
Hmm.
such a high level regularly, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, look at the state of just Gen Z today. It's like
Yeah.
the stuff that they're going through is crazy, and Gen Alpha right behind them. But I feel like it's almost kind of like instead of seeing, I think what maybe we in the church can do is instead of seeing ourselves as like maybe the doctor in the scenario, we're kind of more like the ER front desk person that has to like triage and be like, okay, how like how high do I need to elevate this?
Yeah.
Because this person might need help now. This person might need a different type of help than what we can provide here, and we need
Hmm.
to move them somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
And because like my old youth pastor, he was in charge of 300, 400 kids. Like it's not
yeah,
his
a
job,
lot.
like it's not his job to be the one to start counseling this kid, like, and
Hmm.
so it's just there's not often an adequate referral process. And the most helpful thing would just be to have somebody, part of the staff or the referral base, and that's just kind of what's not happening.
Mm,
Because a lot of kids that go to youth groups, like their parents aren't necessarily in church, they're not super
right.
involved. Like that's just kind of the reality. And so like the amount of times where a pastor's like, "Hey, your kids should go to therapy," the parents aren't gonna, like, unless they
Right.
have like somebody to call and like a number to give them. The chances of the parents like taking the time to do the research, do the calls, is not very high, right? Like it kind of gets
Right.
lost in translation. So, yeah, that's something that I'm really passionate about. Church is kind of improving in. Yeah,
Yeah. That's awesome.
yeah,
That's super cool. And I know you mentioned, I even just would love to take maybe like a minute or two on
yeah.
this, but you're talking about how you work with, you know, like kids, teens, young adults. So
Mhm.
I guess just kind of in general, tell us a little bit of what you've been up to, kind of
Yeah.
about your practice, that type of stuff. If you had to give an elevator pitch to somebody who is interested in connecting with you, what would you say?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I take clients. You got to be in the state of Florida. I'm currently in like South Florida, and I get to be an independent contractor for a company called Palm Beach Behavioral Health and Wellness. They are an absolutely amazing counseling practice, and I'm so honored to be part of their staff there. And so that is more of the kind of the standard, I guess in this conversation, you can call it like the worldly therapy.
Yeah.
Like you're under the ACA code of ethics. You can't bring up God unless your clients bring up God.
Hmm.
Kind of all those state licensing rules. So that is that, and I love having a foot there because like you're gonna get to see families there that aren't gonna come into a church. Um,
Right.
and so even if I can't, outright like talk about God, like they're still walking into a room that's prayed over for them. So I'd rather have them
That's
be with
awesome.
me than just with a stranger.
Yeah.
Um, but then a few months ago, I was like, okay, Lord, like, so much of this like identity stuff and, just like what kids are experiencing right now, like I want to have a space where I am allowed without risking losing my license to be able to, include praying and the Holy Spirit and, talk about biblical like practices and, and
Yeah.
so I did not want to start my own practice. Like, still don't. I don't want to do it, and I'm doing
Mhm.
it. Um,
Yeah.
that was just like never really my goal. But he was just like, you know, I've given you the education, I've given you the passion and the desire to learn this, and you've gone through learning it, and so like it's kind of selfish of you to like not do it.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Wow.
oh shoot. And so that is what you said in the beginning, holy healing counseling.
Yeah.
And that is remote telehealth counseling for like middle school, high school, college age. That's kind of how I say it. And
That's
that
awesome.
is where I incorporate, like, yes, I'm a trained mental health therapist, so I know how to incorporate modalities, of like cognitive behavioral therapy and
Mhm.
DBT and, like family systems and that stuff. But we get to use the Bible and we get to pray and we get to say, like, okay, Holy Spirit, like, we need you to be in this anxiety and in this depression right now. So that's kind of
Yeah.
where I balance and do both.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I feel like that's kind of it's one of those, it's from God if you don't necessarily want to do it on your if it's
Oh
not an
my God.
idea you would have ever come up with on your own. You're like, that one's probably
No.
from the Lord. Um
Yeah. And everyone
and
and like, yeah, yeah. It's really okay, there's been a word, even something so small that like maybe you don't even remember it, but like your subconscious does. So like in this situation, it could be like your high school music teacher and you are so excited to show her a song and she's like, like you are an amazing singer, but that maybe just stick to singing, or like
Yeah.
they say it like really kindly, like, oh, like songwriting is really difficult, maybe you shouldn't add that to your plate, because people don't always
Yeah.
have like negative intentions of like, you suck, you're the worst writer ever.
Right.
Like, it's not always spoken that bluntly, right? Um, but it's like 10 years down the road, like, that you have this dream with God, that He's spoken words to you
Mhm.
and verses to you, and like, that you wanna put this together in a song, but you just can't shake this feeling of like, I'm not good enough. There's other like,
Yeah.
I should just stick to singing other people's songs, like worship covers. And that's why I just really say, like, nobody else knows the private conversations you have with the Lord. So like,
Wow.
who's someone to speak in and be like, did God really say that? It's like, you have no idea,
Yeah.
you know?
That's so good.
Um, And the other side of that is just like, be so careful who you let speak into your life. Like, we
That's
need that
good.
core group of people, like for me, it's my brother in law, my sister, one pastor. It's like those people know that they can speak into my life at any time.
Mhm.
Call me higher, convict me if I'm walking in the wrong way, if I'm speaking something, like they know that they have full authority. If people
Yeah.
are not in that assigned group and they try to tell me something, it's like, I'm sorry, like, you don't have that authority in my life because you don't know me. You don't care for, like, you haven't taken that time to know my heart. So why do you get
Right.
to speak into my heart? You know? And I think
Yeah.
that's something that, and like, especially with creatives, because a lot of time you're on the platform, you're on the stage, you're behind the camera, in front of the camera, like, so people know who you are. And so everybody wants to tell you something, everybody wants to speak to you. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, like, don't let people speak over you if they don't know you, you know?
Yeah. That's so good. I love that because I mean, even thinking in the context of any sort of feedback, it's like feedback is itself is good, right? There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
inherently wrong with feedback, but choosing the voices that we know are going to, like you said, call us higher and
Mm-hmm.
call us out if we need to be called out, convict us if we need to be convicted. But I think people
Mm-hmm.
that really are for us and for our best is so key. And
Mm-hmm.
even kind of rewinding back to something that you had said earlier of like who is anyone to speak into what God has spoken over you. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is so good. And like you use the words like, did God really say? And that
Mm-hmm.
just even makes me think of like, that was the first trick that the devil ever used
Yes,
in the
to
book
Eve.
was
Yeah.
saying to Eve, like, did God really say? And causing her to doubt what she had
Yeah.
heard from the Lord. And boom, we have sin. So I
Yep.
think that that line of thinking and that line of questioning the Lord or causing somebody to question their relationship or what they heard from the Lord, like being able to identify that for what that is like
Yeah.
huge. And I,
Huge.
I think that's something that for me personally, how I've experienced imposter syndrome is 100% in that level of, getting me to the point of like, I'm like, can I hear God or can only these people hear God? Am I hearing him wrong? And
Yeah,
spiral from there. So
exactly.
I love that
And
you said that.
yeah, and another quick note on imposter syndrome, kind of on the opposite side, kind of with the more like therapy side. But so like imposter syndrome isn't inherently like a negative feeling in the sense of,
Mhm.
just like anxiety often gets a bad rep of like being a negative feeling. Anxiety was created to warn us, like warn our bodies when something is
Oof, that's good.
dangerous. And
Yeah.
so like, for imposter syndrome, I'll just say this in my life, like, I would be more concerned as a therapist if I never felt imposter syndrome, because then
Mm,
you're kind of creeping on the line of like being prideful. I know everything. I don't need to keep learning. I don't need to ask questions.
yeah.
But in those sessions or in those times when I'm like, oh man, I really don't feel like I should be doing this, like, those are the times when I go and I talk to my supervisor, or like, I really dive into this and I make myself learn and grow. And so, like, imposter syndrome, if you can kind of reframe it and kind of
Mhm.
remind yourself, like, okay, like, this doesn't always have to be a negative thing. Like, how can I use this feeling and use it to kind of like grow in the areas that I want to become more knowledgeable in.
Wow. I've never even thought about it that way too, of just like
Yeah.
that. And it's kind of, I mean, that's kind of the result of the fall, right? Things that God intended for good and for our, to help us
Yeah.
can totally be twisted into something negative. But
Yeah.
to look at it just inherently as it is, as God created it, and it takes a little bit more of a neutral stance of,
Hmm.
is this a good case or a bad case of something
Hmm.
that's helping me walk in line with what God wants from me? So
Yeah.
that's really good.
Exactly.
Um, I know for me personally, just kind of speaking of imposter syndrome, and even just to segue into like a different topic,
Hmm.
um, for like as I experienced imposter syndrome in my past, I know one thing that it really led to for me was a lot of burnout, because I think in order to prove that I
Hmm.
belonged and that I had a seat at the table, I
Hmm.
would take on more and more and more and try and like, I mean, essentially kind of make myself a doormat at that point, right? Of
Yeah.
like, I'll do anything because I just want to feel like
Yeah.
I belong and I want you to think that I belong too. And I honestly took on so much to the point where my creativity completely fizzled. I was
Hmm.
mentally exhausted, emotionally exhausted, honestly, even physically exhausted.
Yeah.
So I think just thinking about the topic of burnout, what would you say are like maybe some of the signs that creatives can watch out for, or even some of the actions that they can take ahead of time to really prevent burnout before it even happens?
Yeah, I love that question. So I think in the initial situation, when you first get that business plan, that first get that like the goal, the passion, the dream, I want you to like sit down and write out like, okay, what is my purpose of this? What do I feel like God is calling me to accomplish in this? Like what are my practical goals? Because I feel like that is gonna lead you as you go forward. Um, like knowing when to say no and when to
Mm.
say yes, like, and which opportunities to say yes to, like you mentioned, like, kind of, I know that you're a photographer. And so it's like you just wanted to be
Yeah.
known, you wanted to get your name. So, like, maybe you would just say yes to every single client, even if you didn't align with their vision of the shoot.
Right.
And it's like if you keep saying yes and yes and yes, and you don't have any boundaries, any person in the world is going to feel burnt out at the end of that because one, you're
Mhm.
not doing what you're passionate about, and you're also not doing
Right.
like what you're called to walk in. And so instead, you're able to say like, okay, no, I know that my purpose is to um I don't know yours, but I'm just going to say like I know that my purpose is to provide maternity shoots to families, to women, to moms and dads who want to celebrate life. And so if that is your purpose and that's what you feel
Mhm.
God is calling you to do, when you start getting clients of, hey, can you come travel to Oregon and shoot a wedding? Like, yeah,
Right.
cool, that might be a great opportunity and you would get your name out there. But like, is go back to your original list. Like, is that something that I feel like I meant to do in this business? And if it's not,
Mhm.
then, I'm so sorry, no, but here's a referral of a friend that does weddings. Um,
That's so good.
if that kind of makes sense, because yeah, we can't say yes to everything. And that's when boundaries are so important. And boundaries are not bad. Boundaries are so needed.
Yeah, I love that you even mentioned like we can't say yes to everything because I mean, A, it's true, right? If you said yes to everything in the world at some point, you're either not sleeping
Yeah.
or you're Jesus. Like that's the only
Yeah.
person who could possibly even take on any more than any of the average human could. But
Hmm.
I read and I'm totally blanking on the name of the uh the book. So I will have to put it on screen or in the description later on. But a book called The Best Yes. A friend had recommended it to me, and it
Hmm.
basically was like the concept of every time you say yes to something, you're
Hmm.
saying no to something else.
Dang.
And so I love that you said that. Of like, you can't say yes to everything, because the reality is, if you are saying yes to everything, you are saying no to something, and that could be, saying no to a work life balance. That could be saying
Hmm.
um, no to your mental health and your
Or
stability.
yeah, or like in
Yeah,
that scenario, say that you had said yes to that wedding in Oregon, you could have gotten a request to shoot a maternity shoot that same weekend that you would have had to say no to because you were in Oregon doing a wedding. Like
Exactly.
You never know, like God knows. And he's not, if it's truly something that he wants you to do, like he's going to provide it for it.
That's really good too. I love that because I think sometimes, and I can speak even just from the creative field in
Mhm.
general, this idea of actually trusting God to provide what you need and provide the
Mhm.
opportunities for you to carry out.
Yeah.
Know when the next paycheck's coming in because I'm
Yeah.
jumping from job to job. And so, um, yeah, I think that that's like something that even kind of comes in a little bit too of like,
Mhm.
am I actually trusting God to provide for me? And am I
Mhm.
going to trust him with my livelihood, my income, and my calling?
Mhm.
Or am I going to take matters into my own hands? And I think for me,
Mhm.
um, not even 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, when I take matters into my own hands and
Yeah.
rip control away from where I've placed it in the Lord's hands,
Mhm.
it goes very poorly for me,
Yeah.
unsurprisingly, because the
Good.
Bible says it will. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that you said that. Well, I also, I know I mentioned earlier, like just mental health in general,
Mhm.
how I think the pandemic kind of changed the landscape for that.
Mhm.
I think both positively in the sense of we see more of a need for it,
Mhm.
and negatively in the sense of everything that occurred to make us actually see that there was a need for
Yeah.
it. And even now,
Yeah.
4 years mark almost to the
Yeah.
day from when all of that began, people are still reeling from the effects. And
Mhm.
I even recently saw a Harvard study that as much as 36% of young adults nationwide report anxiety. And
Mhm.
I've had tons of conversations with people in the
Mhm.
creative community, even a couple on the show
Yeah.
who, for them, their big battleground in their life has been anxiety or depression. So
Yeah.
for you, you work in the
Mhm.
mental health field. So I'm sure you have even more up close and personal view of that and how it's affecting you.
Fortunately.
So yeah. Obviously, I think it is worth so much of a deeper conversation.
That doesn't struggle with anxiety or depression. You're definitely not alone in it. But two things with that. Like, one, again, be careful who you talk to about that, because
Mhm.
you can kind of go into two different camps. Like, one, oh, yeah, like I struggle with anxiety too. Like, this is so scary. That, like, it can be like you guys can encourage each other in your anxiety, that it's okay and to sit in it. And there's a
Mhm.
difference of like being understanding and empathetic and be like, yeah, I really get it. Like, it sucks. Like, it just does. So, but there's
Yeah.
a difference of doing that versus like, you know, I don't know, just kind of like egging it on, if you know what I mean. And
Mm.
so just also being careful, like who you do open up to about that, because there's people that can kind of like encourage it one way or another. Um, but still find people that open up to about, Um,
Right.
and so I think that's super important. And then I so my therapist recommended me something, and because I think while therapy is more welcomed, medication is still not. And I'm not
Mhm.
super for medication and I'm not super against it.
Mhm.
My therapist, when I was in high school, college, explained it as in like, Kara, your brain is kind of shutting down because you've endured like so much that you can't keep taking on more and more. And that's why you're getting the extreme panic attacks. Just like you can't physically handle it. And so she was like, think of it as like you're putting your brain in a cast, like while you're in therapy, while you're setting boundaries with your parents, while you're taking space, while you're praying and getting healing in churches and freedom groups, like by putting your brain in a cast, like you're giving it the chemical, like serotonin, like you're giving it the chemicals to kind of like relax, like take a break. Because
Mm.
like when you're putting that in your body from like a pill, your body doesn't have to work as hard to produce it. And so it can focus kind of more on like other areas to heal, if that kind
Right.
of makes sense. And that's not like a plug for getting on medication, not for getting on it, but just like if you are a strong Christian and you're also really struggling, like it's okay for a
Hmm.
season to go to a psychiatrist or go to your doctor and be like, hey, I just need some help, like chemically. So I think that's
Yeah.
another really practical step that I have. Um, and then obviously, yeah, like find a professional that you trust. But I would say limit social media. Like you gotta
That's so
limit,
good.
like you just have to. There's no if, buts, or whens. Like, yes, creatives, that's probably a lot of your job. Okay, download
Hmm.
it, post what you have to post for the day, delete it off your phone.
Yeah.
Like kids. And I had a client, she's like 13. She was telling me like self-harm is such like a mainstream thing right now because so many videos on TikTok is just talking about self-harm. So now in my middle school, everyone is self-harming, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, don't even get me started on that. But um,
Yeah.
it's like what you see is what goes into your brain. So if you're watching the news all day, if you're scrolling on TikTok all day, and like you're reading about all this
Yeah.
stuff, and like that just like obviously is going to heighten levels of anxiety and of depression.
Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
yeah. So just find things that you love, find things that you enjoy. I'm a big fan of like if you are feeling a lot of anxiety, water can be really grounding in the sense of take an ice cube and like roll it on the bottom of your feet, roll it on your arm right here, take a warm shower, go if you're in Florida like me, like go walk on the beach, walk on the
Mhm.
grass. Like those are all really grounding activities. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more, but yeah, that's just kind of like basic practical.
Those are awesome.
Yeah.
I'm I'm about to like go take a warm shower now. That's awesome. No, I love the idea of getting into the practicals too of like I do agree. I think sometimes the answer literally is you got to invest and you got to prioritize seeing a professional
Mhm,
and talking through things and getting the healing that you need for
mhm.
things that happened a long time ago or even things that happened recently.
Yeah.
And so I think there's such a need for that, but I think also looking at the practicals of like
Mhm,
whether you are seeing a therapist or whether you're not, if you are seeing a therapist in that, all of the hours outside of maybe that 1 hour a week or 1 hour
yeah,
every other week you're seeing them, what are you doing to
mhm.
really ensure that the progress that's being made during that 1 hour a week carries through so you actually continue to do stuff? And I think those are such good
Exactly.
practicals
And I'm really
of
glad that you mentioned that because a lot of times, people will be like, "Oh, I tried therapy, it didn't work." And it's like, "Well, your therapist isn't magic. Like, it's not like you
right.
go for 1 hour and then you're healed." It's
Yeah.
like your therapist can't want healing for you more than you want it for yourself. And so like if you're there, like, give him or her the ability to, to listen and to help you, but like you can't come and just be like, I don't know, like we
Yeah.
can't read your mind. uh,
Yeah.
so like be willing to put in the work. And oftentimes, like it gets harder before it gets easier. Like if you're feeling a lot of anxiety,
Mhm.
and like you don't really know where it's coming from, if you go to therapy and you start identifying where it's coming from, and maybe, like I'm a big fan of like learning attachment styles and looking into like how you interact with people and how your parents raised you. And a lot of times
Mhm.
that brings up hard stuff that's going to make your next few weeks while you work through it harder rather than easier. But in the long run, it's so much more helpful because that's going to provide like holistic healing rather than putting a band-aid on it.
Yeah. I even love that you're talking about putting in the work too, because I know even just in my experience in therapy,
Hmm.
it's been more of like, and my therapist has honestly been very kind to even just say, hey, I'm not the one that's doing the healing. But she's a Christian therapist. So, I mean, luckily she can also give
Yeah.
attribution to the Lord, but she's
Yeah.
like, it's really you and the Lord. And I'm asking questions and getting your mind working in the direction that it needs to work to
Yeah.
do the healing.
Exactly.
But, it's like, it really is, as much
Yeah.
as your therapist shows up for you, you have to show up just as much. Cause
Mhm.
otherwise, if you're not there, there's really nothing to make progress on,
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And then you
I
can
think that's
take,
key.
like you said that you do, like you take what you learned and what you realized in that hour and you take it to the Lord and you're like, wow, God, I realized that I'm really angry with my dad, or I'm really
Yeah.
angry at my ex-boyfriend for making me feel this way. Like God is not afraid of your strong emotions.
Mhm.
And I'm so thankful for that because I have a lot of them. But it's
Yeah.
God created me with strong emotions so I can know how to sit with other people's emotions. So it's like, don't hate the way that God created you, just take it to Him.
I
Uh,
love that.
yeah.
Oh, mic drop. That was so good. I'm glad that that was my last question because I feel like that was such a great way to end it. Of man, like,
Yeah.
don't, yeah. It's like God. I think ultimately, right? It's like the idea of therapy, and I think even creativity is about getting in touch with what makes us human and being okay with it,
Hmm.
and being grateful for it, and partnering with the Lord to use what we've learned in those areas to make a difference in somebody else's life, whether
Hmm.
that's, for you, that's heart to heart with another
Hmm.
person. For a lot of creatives, it's creating something that draws out and evokes those
Yeah.
emotions in other people. And so,
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that art is something that is even used a lot in the therapy
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Because I think there are a lot of parallels in it. And so,
100%.
um, yeah, I think just in general, I see a lot of that in this conversation.
Hmm.
And
There is hope. And it's so cheesy, but like I have hope. I got it tattooed that summer after
I love that.
I did therapy in the beginning because like if you don't have hope, you have no reason to keep living. And it's
Mm,
like, yeah, like your life might honestly just be really hard. Like just it might just
yeah,
always be really hard. But it's like you have hope, and so like keep going like every single day. Like just put one foot in front of the other. And so that's just like what I want people to know. Like there is hope. Um, yeah,
that's awesome.
there
I
is.
love that. Well, I mean, honestly, Kara, this conversation was such a blessing to me. I'm so looking forward to sharing with our audiences because it's not even like I think it's going to bless them. I know it's going to bless them.
Oh,
So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the audience, thank you guys for listening. If you were impacted by today's episode, give this podcast a rating and a review. It's just the number one way to get this podcast in front of other creatives just like you so that they can experience the encouragement that you're experiencing right now. And that'll do it for today. So I'll catch you guys next time. And until then, keep creating.